Hi, Honors World History students. So last week we talked about how the church does play a big role in people's lives during the Middle Ages. So today is really about that breakdown of the church. So what led to it being a strong institute? Strong institution during the Middle Ages, and then what will lead to the breakdown of the church's powers. I mentioned on Friday that we would talk about the Great Schism, and so today that's what I want to talk about. Tomorrow we're going to start to discuss the Middle Ages overall, so you're going to look for that assignment for tomorrow, and that really will be your review. And then the following day, on Wednesday, I'll introduce the test. Now the test won't be a multiple choice test, it'll be something that you're going to have to write, and that'll make more sense once we get to it. So the Roman Empire will end up collapsing, and in that void will come the Catholic Church. And it will actually take over a lot of different areas and provide stability in a lot of different areas in medieval or Middle Ages Europe. One area that will serve as a stabilizing force is the monks and monasticism. So you can see that there's some monastic orders or some monks who take on vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So they're going to set a standard for how to conduct yourself in everyday life. Besides that, the church will also provide schooling, but obviously not for everybody. It's going to be mostly for the upper class kids. Churches also can be a place where people take refuge, especially during war, or if somebody needs a place to stay, or if somebody's not doing well. There's a lot of things monks did besides just church things and providing services like that. They also copied books, and then finally they would also go out into the community to try to convert more people to the Catholic Church. So you can see how the Catholic Church is playing a role in a variety of areas in people's lives. Now, the church had a lot of power during this time period. The church actually controlled a large amount of land, and that's true even today. They would actually try to tell people when they could and could not fight. So if you can imagine that there are time periods where the church said you are not allowed to fight, or certain days when you are not allowed to conduct a battle. The church also went after anybody who was not a believer in the Catholic Church. So that could take a couple of, or could look a couple of different ways. We've already read about the Crusades and how the Catholic Church sent crusaders out to the Holy Land to try to take it back over, to restore the Holy Land in the Middle East to the Catholic Church. Within Europe itself, the Catholic Church went after anybody who was a non-believer or would question the church and its power. And that led to several things. Number one, they went after Jews and Muslims who would not convert, and they would either execute them or kick them out of the country. In addition, if you were somebody within the church, a Christian who questioned the church's teachings, you would also be persecuted. The church also had a lot of power economically. They would actually require you to pay 10% of your income, of your earnings, to the church. Now, if you think about that, that was required. So if you imagine in the United States, everybody has to, or most people have to give 10% of their income to the church. I think we'd be up in arms if that was a requirement. This is a schedule for a monk's day, so this gives you an idea of how structured the church life could be and how structured a person's life could be during this time period. Now, I know you're at home right now and you're trying to figure out a schedule that works best for you, but picture this type of schedule where You can see how a lot of your day is dominated by work. You eat very little. So during the winter, you have one main meal for the day. During the summer, you have two main meals for the day. So that's not a lot. And then besides that, you're working for God, and you're praying, you're attending church services and running church services. After that, you're meditating and reading, and you're doing other work around the monastery. So there's not a lot of variety to your life, but that shows you how the church dominated somebody's life. So how does the church, who's very powerful and dominates most people's lives, start to fade? Well, one of the time periods that really embarrasses the church is this time period that we're going to be talking about. So one thing I probably should talk about is that the Pope, or a person who's called a Pope, is the leader of the Catholic Church. And that person is based out of Rome, or more specifically, Vatican City. Well, during this time period, Philip the Fair convinced several popes to live and operate in France. Now, for you, that may not seem like a big deal, but remember that the church is a powerful, powerful institution. And so the fact that the leader of that institution resides normally in Rome and then leaves and ends up in France gives France an advantage. It shows that area of the world has the power, the seat of power. Literally, you have the Pope in your country. So eventually, this starts to rub people the wrong way. Add to that the popes were living extravagant lives. They were not living based on their vows of chastity and poverty, like we talked about at the beginning of this video. They had extravagant clothing. They were not the poorest people in the world, or in Europe certainly. So that people start to look at the Pope and question whether they're following what they're actually preaching. In 1377, Pope Gregory does bring the papacy back to Rome, but he dies pretty quickly. Italians very quickly want the new Pope to be an Italian. So when Pope Urban does take over in 1378, he tries to restore the papacy to its original meaning, and tries to question people who have gone away from those original teachings, who've taken on a lot of wealth as a religious person. Now you can imagine if a pope starts questioning how you're living your life, saying you're living too wealthy of a life and you need to cut back on things, that you're going to push back on that. And that's exactly what the clergy beneath the Pope, so they're called cardinals, start to do. They start to get upset that the Pope is questioning them and criticizing how they live their lives. So the cardinals eventually elect another Pope. That's right, there are two popes at the same time. Now, one thing I should also add to this is that you got to remember the role that the church played at this time. You did not question the church, or if you did, you got in trouble. The church was a major institution that was seen as infallible. It could not make mistakes. But now you have two popes. How do you end up with two popes? That does not make sense. I thought there was only one person that God communicated through, not two. So this is obviously a very embarrassing time for the church, and it's known as the Great Schism. Now, why the Great Schism? Because again, the church is now split into two different groups. Part of the church believes that Clement is the actual pope, and then others believe that Urban is the actual pope. So the church has been divided. So clearly the church is struggling towards the latter end of the Middle Ages. So there are people who come out saying they need to fix the church. They need to reform the church. And they tried to do this in a variety of ways. One was trying to set up councils or groups of people to come up with changes for the church. And there are a couple of people who go down that power to try to say that the church doesn't have final say in people's lives, to remind people that it's actually the government that does that. There's some others who think that the church itself needs to re-examine its own teachings and go back to the scripture as a source of salvation. There are some who are starting to go away from the original teachings in the Bible, and so that begins to get questioned. Jan Hus is one of the more famous people who questioned the church and its teachings and wanted to return to its original teachings. And eventually Martin Luther will come along and talk about faith alone can save you, not the priest, not the church, the Catholic Church, but faith alone is what will save you. So eventually the church realizes, yes, we probably should make some changes to what's going on. And they set up a council to meet to go over some changes. And eventually they elect Pope Martin V. And he's going to remain in Rome. But there's another problem. You already have 2 other popes. So what are they going to do? You probably guessed it. They are going to keep their power. So now you have 3 popes. So this is very embarrassing for the church. Jan Hus, who goes to one of these councils to try to help, is captured and burned at the stake. So needless to say, reforms aren't happening. And in fact, most people are now realizing that the church really does have issues that need to be fixed. So those are some issues that are going to be addressed in about 100 years. Overall today, I try to go over some of the important roles that the church played within a community, within European society during the Middle Ages. So go ahead and identify 2 things the church did to help society during the Middle Ages, and then post that along with your response to the next question or statement, which is identify 2 problems the church created during the Middle Ages. So go ahead and post a document or submit a document within Schoology. You'll find that assignment in Schoology, the same place that you found this video. So I hope this was helpful. Tomorrow I'll come back to you and we'll talk about the Middle Ages overall, and I'll have you post something on Schoology. All right, have a great day.